Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling.
Wayne now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Ichiro now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling.
Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling.
Wayne now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling.
Good sentiment is pricing. Ichiro now forecast Dow Jones begin rising.
Laura now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Big data is pricing in. Wayne now forecast Dow Jones begin rising.
Laura now forecasts S&P 500 finish falling. Social media trending sentiments is pricing in. Verna now forecast Dow Jones begin rising. Constituents moves is pricing in. Laura now forecast Dow Jones begin rising. Big data pricing in. Wayne now forecast Dow Jones begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing in. Ichiro now forecasts S&P 500 begin rising.
Laura now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Ichi now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Wayne now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Laura now forecast H shares finish rising.
Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Verna now forecast H shares finish rising. Kelvin now forecast H shares finish rising. Wayne now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Laura now forecast H shares finish rising. Jimmy now forecast H shares finish rising. Wayne now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Laura now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Laura now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Wayne now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Kelvin now forecast H shares finish rising.
Jimmy now forecast H shares finish rising.
Jimmy now forecast H shares finish rising.
Laura now forecast Hang Seng finish rising.
Kelvin now forecast H shares finish rising. Laura now forecast Hang Seng finish rising. Good sentiment sees pricing energy now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Big data pricing in Verna now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Risk appetite is pricing in Jimmy now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Good sentiment is pricing in now forecasts and P500 begin rising. Consistent and smooth cis pricing in now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
CNBC sentiment sees pricing in now forecasts and P500 begin rising. Social media trending sentiment sees pricing in Verna now forecasts and P500 begin rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Social media trending sentiment cis pricing in Verna now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Satellite data is pricing in Kelvin now forecasts and P500 begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client as pricing in Kelvin now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Good sentiment cis pricing in Jimmy now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Constituents move cis pricing in now forecasts and P500 begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecasts and P500 begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Ichiro now forecasts and P500 begin rising. CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Constance moves pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin rising. CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Constituents move sees pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Satellite data is pricing in Kelvin now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing Ichiro now forecast China A50 begin rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin rising.
Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin forecast H shares begin rising.
Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin forecast H shares begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin forecast H shares begin rising. Constituents moves is pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising.
Constance moves pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising. Risk appetite is pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin now forecast H shares begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising. Constance moves pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing Ichiro now forecast H shares begin rising.
CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising. Satellite data is pricing in Kelvin now forecast H shares begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi Son's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin now forecast H shares begin rising.
Big data pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
Good sentiment sees pricing Ichiro now forecast H shares begin rising. CNBC sentiment SIS pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising. Constituents move SIS pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising. Satellite data pricing in Kelvin forecast H shares begin rising. Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi-san S bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin forecast H shares begin rising.
CNBC sentiments is pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising.
Big data pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Ichiro now forecast H shares begin rising. Satellite data is pricing in Kelvin now forecast H shares begin rising. Constituents moves pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising. Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Kelvin now forecast China A50 finish rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Jimmy now forecast China A50 finish rising.
Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi-san S bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Laura now forecast China A50 finish rising. Social media trending sentiment sees pricing in Verna now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Ichiro now forecast China A50 finish rising. Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Laura now forecast China A50 finish rising.
Laura now forecast China A50 finish rising.
Risk appetite high pricing in Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Good sentiment sees pricing in Ichiro now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Bloomberg sentiments Masayoshi-san's bankers are worried about their favorite client is pricing in Kelvin. Forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Big data is pricing in wane now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Jimmy now forecast China A50 finish rising. Jimmy now forecast China A50 finish rising. Verna now forecast China A50 finish rising.
Social media trending sentiments is pricing in Verna now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Kelvin now forecast China A50 finish rising. CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Ichiro now forecast China A50 finish rising.
CNBC sentiment says pricing in Laura now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Big data is pricing in wane now forecast Hang Seng begin rising.
Risk appetite high pricing in Jimmy now forecast Hang Seng begin rising. Jimmy now forecast H shares finish rising. Jimmy now forecast H shares finish rising. Ichiro now forecast H shares finish rising. Kelvin now forecast H shares finish rising.
Wayne now forecast H shares finish rising. Laura now forecast H shares finish rising. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Wayne now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Laura now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Ichiro now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Ichiro now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Ichiro now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Kelvin now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising. Laura now forecasts S&P 500 finish rising.
Wayne now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Laura now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Jimmy now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Laura now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Laura now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Laura now forecasts and P500 finish rising.
Bitcoin extends tumble, falls below $7,000 to lowest since Mighty's pricing in Kelvin now forecast China A50 begin falling. Jimmy now forecast Dow Jones finish rising.
Constituents move CIS pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin falling.
Kelvin now forecast Dow Jones finish rising.
Ichiro now forecast Dow Jones finish rising. De-risking appetite high pricing in Jimmy now forecast China A50 begin falling.
Wayne now forecast Dow Jones finish rising.
Good sentiment CIS pricing Ichiro now forecast H shares begin rising. Big data pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
Constituents moves pricing in Laura now forecast China A50 begin falling.
Social media trending sentiment CIS pricing in Verna now forecast China A50 begin falling. Big data pricing in Wayne now forecast China A50 begin falling. Good sentiment CIS pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising.
Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising.
Satellite data pricing in Kelvin now forecast H shares begin rising.
Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising. Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising.
CNBC sentiment sees pricing in Laura now forecast H shares begin rising.
Big data is pricing in Wayne now forecast H shares begin rising. Fox sentiment sees pricing in Jimmy now forecast H shares begin rising.